Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and this is another instalment of the Career Profiles series. And this episode is all about Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez. Now, admittedly, I don't know a great deal about Wilfredo Gomez and his history, and I'm aware of some of his triumphs and his tragedies in his career, but it was one that I selected myself because I wanted to educate myself on Wilfredo Gomez's career, and he'd come up in various other bits of literature that we'd read through and that we'd researched for some of the other podcasts, and he's mentioned in passing in some of the other podcasts that we produced over the years, and I felt like I wanted to do someone completely different and someone that I didn't really know too much about. So I put the research together for this episode, and I thought, this is great. This is going to be something that you guys really enjoy. So this is another 4-part episode on Wilfredo Gomez this time round. But before I get into the story, I do want to say thank you to everybody that's been listening and also that's been commenting, especially on Spotify. Thank you so much for those that have been responding to my questions, that have been talking about the length of the episodes and highlighting the fact that they can be under a certain length of time before it becomes maybe too much for one particular episode. So a big thanks to all those that have been doing that over the course of the last few weeks. If you haven't subscribed to us on any of the podcasting platforms and it's the first time you're listening to us, you can find us on Apple, on Spotify, and all other good podcasting apps out there. If you listen to this via YouTube, a big shout out to you guys. There is a select few that do like to listen to it through YouTube, and thank you so much for doing that, and thank you so much for commenting on those videos that go up there for these episodes as well. Really appreciate that. If you've not followed us on social media, it's pretty easy. If you're on X, you can do career_profiles, but everything else is at the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. So this is part 1, and of course with part 1 we'll always go into the beginning of the story of how these individuals that we cover got into this sport. And this story begins on the 29th of October, 1956, when Wilfredo Gomez Rivera was born. He was one of 2 siblings born in Barrio Las Monjas, and his mother and father, Paula and Jacobo, were good, hard-working parents who instilled a sense of pride and worth within their children. Despite the difficulties of growing up in an impoverished district of San Juan, young Wilfredo never felt that he was poor. The love he received from his parents taught him that he would never feel that sorrow or a resentment toward them despite the suffering that he would get used to as a child. Gomez, who was known as Papo, helped take care of his deaf and mute sister Laura, whom he loved and would later help immensely when he became a champion. He said, "It was a rough neighbourhood and I had to look out for her." Now, according to those who knew young Wilfredo intimately, he was an active young boy who played all sports, but eventually would realise his ability as a boxer. He sold little coconut candies on the streets to help himself, but that was not always profitable. He said, "I would end up eating them all. I liked all kinds of music and television shows. I played baseball, basketball, and I even played shortstop. But I was too short and I decided to go for boxing." His auntie, who still lives in Las Monjas, recalled a mischievous child who always was getting into something. What Gomez could not avoid was fighting in the streets of Las Monjas. Everything that he did revolved around boxing. Jacobo didn't question his son's newfound passion. Surviving in Las Monjas was not as easy because Gomez slept on a mattress on the floor, and by the age of 9, he started going to the local boxing gym, the Sixto Escobar gym, more regularly and never stopped going. It was not uncommon back in the early 1960s to have a little store and sell candies and other sundry items to the neighbours. In Sanctuary, Jacobo ran one out of his home. Although he was not home often because of his hours as a taxi driver, Jacobo always found time to be around family and friends. The way Papo had to grow up was hard, said Nista Marquez Gomez, Wilfredo's cousin. I remember this store that Jacobo had, and he would sell little things out of it. He would buy things, keep them at home, and then sell them to the neighbours. You know, candies and other things that have a room in the house. There was nothing pretentious about Jacobo, and family members fondly remember that the party didn't truly start until he arrived. He was always the life of the party, said Nitsa. Nothing started until he showed up. He was such a good guy, a lot of fun, always laughing. Jacobo wanted what was best for his family and never strayed from that goal. It was a tight-knit family where familiar faces and a cup of coffee or a piece of cake were minutes away. Young Wilfredo looked to his father for guidance, but did not always make the best decisions. He said, "My dad tried to give me a lot of advice. At times it was tough, but boxing helped me stay out of trouble." Nitsa, who is 8 years younger than Wilfredo, fondly remembers the days when her cousin used to drive up the street in his fancy white Chevy Monte Carlo. However, Nitsa also recalls the time they spent together at the home of Mafela, Nitsa's grandmother, which was 2 minutes from her own house, just passing the time drinking coffee or eating snacks. Back then, Wilfredo would joke about how big Nitsa's nose was or pick on her about something else. Mafela, my grandmother on my father's side, used to joke with us and say, "I am Gomez." She was very proud about that, said Nitsa. We used to like to play jokes all the time. Wilfredo and I spent our youth together. We used to live 2 minutes walking distance from each other, and on our way home, we would stop at Mafela's to drink coffee and make jokes. Wilfredo, he concurred with that statement. He said, "She was my great aunt on my father's side. We would go to her house together to talk and laugh. We talked about life and our experiences. I used to joke around with Nitsa a lot." If Jacobo was the outgoing father who worked hard to make ends meet and was rarely home, Paula stayed home and took excellent care of Laura and Wilfredo. The neighbours also helped take care of the children and would often help Paula and Jacobo. Anything that the children needed, Paula went out of her way to provide them with. When Wilfredo became champion of the world, he never forgot the sacrifices that his mother made. Paula was a really hard-working woman, said Nitsa. She gave everything to her boy and girl. Papo's sister did not speak or hear, and Paula was very dedicated to taking care of both of them. Nitsa's recollection about Paula rang true for everyone in the Gomez family. Whilst Wilfredo was forced to grow up quickly, he still looked to his rock-solid mother for guidance. As much as they struggled, the children never felt as if they were mired in poverty. Paula's first marriage ended in divorce, and the children stayed with their father. Wilfredo's half-sister Julia grew up hours away from Las Monjas with her father in the northern part of the island. She said, "I was still a child when they got separated. When they got separated, Wilfredo lived on the southern eastern part of the island and I lived in the north. It took 3 years for her to find someone and get remarried. My father kept me away, so I grew up with my father's family. I hardly saw her until I was 18 or 19. When I was older, my father sent me to New York to live. Every time I came back to Puerto Rico, I used to visit Wilfredo and my mother. They were a very nice family, and he was always in the street boxing. I couldn't communicate with Laura because she was deaf-mute. I hardly saw Jacobo because he was always working. Laura was deaf, so Wilfredo, of course, was very protective of her. They were living in a very poor neighbourhood, and he wanted to get out, and he was able to do that. Wilfredo really helped out my mother. After one of his early fights, he bought her the house that he now lives in. He took care of his sister Laura and did everything for her. She had 3 children and he provided for them. One of them is a lawyer. Whatever energy Paula had, she put it into her family. Later on, when Wilfredo became a world champion, she begrudgingly accepted his profession, but didn't travel to fights. It was too difficult for her. As a teenager, Wilfredo was already moving into the boxing spectrum, but he always knew where he stood in regards to his mother. Julia said, "My mother was always after him. She always wanted to know what he was doing. She was very close with both of them, and they had a very tight-knit family. For my mother, it was almost like she had lost 3 kids when she and my father separated. My dad stayed with all 3 of us." One thing all family members agree on is that once Wilfredo got the boxing bug, he never looked back. Julia never saw him much, but she recalls a family that did everything together, even if they didn't have much. She said he used to hang out within the neighbourhood with the boys where kids just played around. That's when he picked up boxing in the streets. I heard about Wilfredo selling these coconut candies when he was younger, and I remember back then 2 cents was a lot of money. I could buy a lot back then with the 2 cents. Along with the makeshift store, Jacobo was also an avid boxing fan who took to the streets to set up matches for the local kids. Whether or not he knew that his son had a gift was not evident, but the passion for boxing was strong in the Gomez family. Jacobo married Paula and they lived in a small house behind my mother, said Jorge Marquez Gomez, Wilfredo's uncle. They bought a house in Pachin Marin neighbourhood. When Wilfredo was born, Jacobo made a business in front of the house to help economically. Jacobo was very happy all the time. He loved to tell a lot of jokes. He was a very nice person to be around. When I was a kid, I liked going to Jacobo's house. He was like the cool uncle. Jacobo was always in a good mood. He had these roosters that he would fight, and Wilfredo was raised in that environment. In that time, Jacobo would also set up fights in the streets for kids. The kids were fighting all the time, and that's how Wilfredo grew up. At the time, there was another taxi driver named Enrique Carrion. He would help the kids with boxing. Since he had a full-time job as a taxi driver, all of his extra time was spent helping the kids. No one ever had a bad thing to say about Jacobo. Wilfredo would say, "My father had that little store, and he would sell foods like rice, beans, cheese and juice. It wasn't like a happy hour place, but just a place to gather." As a young boy, Wilfredo reflected those same qualities that attracted people to his father. People wanted to be around him. He was not introverted, but rather an easygoing boy who had a growing passion to become a boxer. More importantly, although his focus was boxing, Wilfredo never stopped learning. He always wanted to engage in the learning process, and that carried over into adulthood. He said, "I liked history. I liked learning about other countries in Latin America. I liked learning about the history of the United States. I wanted to understand the hardships and how life was in those places. For me, it was important to go to school." According to all accounts, Wilfredo became obsessed with the sport. Early on, as an amateur, Wilfredo had Carrion as his guide, and he helped Wilfredo see the benefits of his role model status among his peers. Before Wilfredo became famous, said Marquez Gomez, he was very disciplined and very respectful. He had Carrion to help him understand how to be polite and courteous. Carrion also helped him understand how to be well-behaved and a good sport. The more that Gomez became involved in boxing, the less his family members saw him. Prior to his first amateur fight, Gomez had already gained acclaim for his street fights. He said, "I was always fighting in the streets." No one knew what Gomez was actually truly capable of, but the first day he walked into the local boxing gym, something just clicked. There was no backstory or convoluted story. It was just a boy who wanted to learn how to box and was willing to go to great lengths to learn the sport. Wilfredo said, "It was a very tiny gym. The boxing mat was a floor, a dirt floor, but we just put on the gloves and sparred." At 13, Gomez recalled one of his first forays in the ring when he faced off against a jockey. "I knocked him out with one punch," he said. "I had a God-given gift as a puncher. I knocked him out with a left jab and a right hand." Early on, Gomez relied on Carrion to take his aggression and refine it in the ring, which was not always an easy task. Carrion needed to see a level of dedication to his craft before he devoted himself to Gomez or any young fighter. When Carrion began to work with Gomez, the teenager was a one-dimensional fighter. Thus, Carrion's job was to ensure that by the time Gomez moved into the professional spectrum, he would possess the mental and physical capabilities to maintain his speed, composure and movement during a grueling bout. Puerto Rican broadcaster Rafael Braceo said, "I knew him as an amateur and he was masterful. He was a wonderful boy who came from poverty. He came from a poor society. As an amateur, he was excellent. He was like nothing I had seen, and to that point, I had seen some great fighters." Bracero added, "He was dealing with a lot of problems at home. He had a lot of ability. Enrique Carrion developed technique and power." Every great fighter experiences this early transition. A trainer, often a local one, will immediately begin to size up the young boy coming back to the gym each day. The trainer will need to see what happens when that fighter gets hit for the first time. Also, the trainer must gauge if the fighter is in the sport for the long haul, or if he is merely trying to find something in himself and then leave the gym. Carrion, the taxi driver, knew that Gomez had something that appealed to him, or he wouldn't have continued to work with him. He trained Gomez out of the Sixto Escobar gym in San Juan and would later move on to mesmerize crowds at Malta Corona gym on 22nd Street in Santurce. Instead, of just instilling confidence in the ring, he also wanted young Wilfredo to understand that he had a responsibility to act a certain way because people began to look up to him. Carrion drove a minivan and he would transport tourists to and from the hotels. And Wilfredo said, he would tell me, "You're going to become champion of the world one day." At the time, I was a very disciplined fighter. Only 2 years later, Gomez was fighting in the 1972 Olympics in Munich, Germany. Since Gomez was not old enough to fight in the prestigious games, local officials had to doctor his birth certificate to secure him a spot. It was an extremely tense moment for Gomez, who was leaving home for the first time. Coupled with the terrorist attack which targeted the Israeli athletes, Gomez faced a host of pressures as a 15-year-old. "No, that wasn't knowledge," confirmed Gomez regarding the birth certificate. "I was a year younger, but I didn't have to present it. I recall doing it, but the talk about the certificate was never materialised." When it came to boxing, Gomez and teammate Jose Luis Fallon had no problems, but they had not mastered table etiquette when it came to the formal Olympic dinners. Gomez said, "When we went to a gala, we all sat, around 12 of us. We sat down and we had no idea what to do with the spoons, knives and forks. We were making fun of one another. We didn't know what they meant when they said which spoon is for each meal. We just didn't know which one was for the meat and which one was for the seafood. When I see Fallon, we always think about that and we laugh." Gomez represented Puerto Rico as a 112-pound flyweight, 10 pounds less than he would fight as a professional. He was learning how to succeed as an amateur and was developing all of the nuances of being a great amateur fighter. Later, Gomez would be forced to learn an entirely new foreign style as a professional. He lost to Egypt's Mohamed Salim 4-1 in the second round on the 31st of August 1972. Gomez was disqualified for dipping and leading with his head, an infraction in amateur fighting. He said, "I was only 15 at the time and I didn't know the Olympic rules. If I was 2 years older, I probably would have fought very differently." Salim was knocked out in the third round. Gomez's close friend, Jose Luis Fallon, the featherweight representative from Puerto Rico, also dropped his first Olympic matchup to Argentina's Alberto Mario Ortiz. In a legendary bantamweight matchup, Cuba's Orlando Martinez stopped future world champion Alfonso Zamora 5-0. Gomez knew he would eventually move up and face the spectacular Cuban. He said, "I was very nervous going into the fight. I was very young. I didn't have any experience. It was the first time I left home. It was my first international competition. I would later win 6 gold medals." Paula implored her son to be strong and not to worry because it would help with the experience. She knew exactly how to soothe her son, who was quickly growing into becoming one of the best boxers in Puerto Rico. On the 5th of September, Gomez became a part of the frightening narrative that was beginning to unfold in the Olympic Village as Black September faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization began a harrowing evening of terror which ended in the deaths of 11 Israelis. Gomez said, "The place where we were staying was very close to the Israelis. Hector Cardona kept us all together. We were sequestered and we couldn't do anything. It was a very intense moment." Despite feeling the tension of the moment, Gomez and the other Puerto Rican athletes were kept inside until the violence had subsided and the threat diminished. The murders of the Israelis created a pall over the remainder of the Olympic Games. No one expected Gomez to return with a gold medal, but the experience proved invaluable. Studying the Cuban fighters allowed Gomez to devise his own plan for success against the best fighters in the world. First, he wanted Orlando Martinez. Back then, he said, the Cubans were considered professionals. Orlando was the Olympic champion that year, and I remember seeing him, and I told him, "I will get you on the way down." He was a slippery fighter who punched well. He hit hard. The Cubans have 15 or 20 years of amateur experience. Here in Puerto Rico, amateurs are amateurs, he said. Due to his amateur status, Gomez was getting opportunities that eluded his parents. He was travelling around the world and experiencing new cultures. Still, they were not sold on his newfound passion. He said, "My dad didn't want me to box because of the damaging punches, but I would still sneak out and practice. My mum wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer." 2 years later, Gomez earned his way to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic to compete in the Central American and Caribbean Games, which started on the 27th of February and ended on the 13th of March. The talented Gomez had significantly improved as a fighter by then. Both physically and mentally, Gomez had matured and did not make the same mistakes that marred his Olympic performance in 1972. 23 countries competed in 18 different sports. Now, the burden was on Gomez to shine. If he wanted to make a statement, the Games provided him an avenue to showcase his talents. In the quarter-final bout, Gomez knocked out Ramon Henriquez in 2 rounds and then returned in the semi-finals to decision his nemesis, Orlando Martinez, in 3 rounds. It was his second victory in as many bouts over Martinez as Gomez decisioned the Cuban the previous November. Then, on the 9th of March, Gomez secured his gold medal by knocking out Jovito Rengifo in 3 rounds. He said, "I was only 16 or 17 years old. It was a very hard fight." His friend Jose Luis Fallon recalled the bout with mature and experienced Cuban, and he said, "I was fighting at 132 pounds and Wilfredo fought at 119 pounds. I was heavier than him, but I sparred with him a little. Back then, he had such a hard punch, a very, very strong punch. I saw the fight with Orlando Martinez. He was a gold medalist in the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. He was a god. Martinez was the best boxer in Cuba, and Wilfredo at 17 was like a child. Then Gomez went out and beat him." Sparring with Fallon helped sharpen Gomez. Moving and boxing well, Fallon was hard to hit, fast, and had a strong punch himself. With Carrion as his guide, Gomez was making remarkable progress. What was more important was the relationship that developed. Gomez often looked at Carrion like his papa and put his trust in him. At that age, that strong bond was more important than any of Gomez's victories. He said, "I learned a lot from him. I learned that the left hook to the liver was a killer. I learned to move laterally and use my speed. I learned how to hit and avoid punches at the same time. He showed me how to throw combinations and use head movement. Those are skills I perfected later on." Another impressive victory later that March came over a local phenom, Wilfred Benitez. Benitez was a young star under the tutelage of his father Gregorio, a respected trainer who had a legendary temper. After Gomez decisioned Benitez in a nondescript bout, Gregorio and Enrique Carrion got into a fight in the corner. The two would never meet again in the ring. "It was an okay sparring session," Gomez recalled. "I felt comfortable against him. I remember my father got into a fight with someone in the other corner. Then Carrion fought with Benitez's father. Gregorio got into it with someone in the crowd. Gregorio was a good trainer, but he couldn't control his temper. He liked to go to the racetrack to make a lot of bets, and he lost a lot." There was something special about Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez long before he fought for the 122-pound World Championship. The way he carried himself, the confidence, the feeling of being invincible, the utter defiance. For Gomez, it was only a matter of time before he would become champion of the world. Anyone who saw him fight during this time was likely to concur. The young fighter had already backed up his prediction that he would beat Martinez, but becoming a world amateur champion would be the climax of a near-perfect amateur career. Surprisingly, in 96 fights, Gomez had only suffered 3 amateur losses. The first recorded defeat was the one to Salim in the 1972 Olympic Games. Then Gomez suffered a loss to Martin Vargas, and his third came against the tall, powerful Derek Holmes in the final round of the North American Boxing Championships in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Holmes was born in the New Carrollton suburbs of Washington, D.C., with Sugar Ray Leonard, and they spent a lot of time together in and out of the ring. While Leonard became the Olympic darling, Holmes began to etch his own career. "Wilfredo was walking around with his muscle shirt showing off," said Holmes. Occasionally, amateur boxers will develop a friendship, but Gomez and Holmes did not share any similar interest, except for one incident where they were flirting with the same girl a week prior to their showdown. "He got the girl," said Holmes, "but I got the trophy." Holmes stopped Gomez in 1 round a month before he was set to compete in the World Championships in Havana, Cuba. It was a huge shock to Gomez, who had never been sent to the canvas. He didn't have much time to regroup. Holmes would stay the course as an amateur, but miss his opportunity to go to the 1976 Olympic Games because he would lose his focus. Holmes hit me right on the chin and knocked me out, Gomez said. That knockout loss gave me more motivation to be well prepared in Havana and not get hit by another lucky punch. That August, Gomez headed to Cuba in what would represent his final amateur boxing experience. Everything that Gomez had dreamt of was now coming to fruition. In the ring, Gomez had learned something new from each bout. When Gomez started as an amateur, he was raw and he lacked experience to make certain decisions in the ring. Now he fought with an assertiveness that belied his age. It was no secret to the Cubans that Gomez was the star, and his victories over Martinez, their gold medalist, were reminders that he was a fighter with few flaws in his repertoire. Orlando Martinez was much more experienced than Derek Holmes, said Gomez. He was a very strong fighter. Travelling to the World Amateur Championships in Havana with Valon, Gomez knew that his amateur career was winding down. On the 24th of August 1974, Gomez stopped Peru's Miguel Viti just 2 rounds into a second-round match. Next, 2 days later, Gomez knocked out Poland's Krzysztof Madje in 2 rounds in the quarterfinals. Then, on the 28th of August, Gomez needed only 1 round to secure his 3rd-round stoppage against France's Aldo Costanino. In what would be his last amateur bout, Gomez next stopped Cuba's Jorge Luis Romero in 2 rounds. In that fight, Gomez systematically destroyed a very good fighter. He knocked him down 3 times in the first round. Maturity, speed and power were all rare attributes for a 16-year-old, but Gomez displayed them in abundance. He beat Romero in the final, said Valon. I remember Romero went to the floor 5 times in the fight. Gomez killed him. It was a one-sided fight. Wilfredo showed that he was a superb boxer. Away from the ring, Gomez may have made a greater impression on all Cubans. It was around this time that Gomez was baptized Bazooka by famous Cuban journalist René Molina for the power in his fists. Prior to that nickname, Gomez just went by Dynamite. Wilfredo was a very happy boxer, a very happy guy, said his friend Valon. He was crazy for girls. He didn't talk much about his boxing. He was humble. Even now when I go to Cuba, everyone only wants to talk about Wilfredo. Prior to heading on their journey, Gomez worked for the government with Valon. We worked with kids who came from very poor neighbourhoods, said Gomez. We were teaching them how to box and talking to them about motivation. We tried to help them get focus and help them with their lives. These kids were all different and specialised in different areas, but I only taught boxing. It was a masterful performance by the Puerto Rican to become the world amateur champion at 122 pounds. The Cubans pleaded with Gomez to stay in Cuba and get a world-class education, but Gomez had his sights set on the professional ranks. Conversely, Valon decided to stay and take up their offer to get his education. I remember the World Championships were held in Cuba, said the Puerto Rican broadcaster Rafael Bracero. They had a lot of great young boxers there. They liked Wilfredo because he was an extrovert. He beat guys who would be world champions. He knocked all of them out. Back then, in those games, you knocked out one guy and the next guy was better. The people there wanted Wilfredo to stay and make his residence in Cuba. I have been dealing with sports for a long time, said Bracero. I have seen a lot of boxers in my time. I saw Sugar Ray Robinson, the best boxer in history. I remember thinking that I hadn't seen something like what I had with Wilfredo. While Gomez set his sights on greener pastures, Valon decided to take his chances and get the level of education that he believed was not possible in Puerto Rico. For the previous 3 years, Valon had worked alongside Gomez in various capacities, but now was the time for them to go their separate ways. Valon said, I remember we started working together at 16 or 17 years of age for the government. We would work with children and teach them sports like baseball and basketball. We started boxing together in 1971, and we both were national champions and went on to the international tournaments. I fought as a featherweight and a lightweight, and Wilfredo fought as a flyweight. After the World Championships, I had the opportunity to stay in Cuba and study, but Wilfredo said he wanted to go back and turn professional and make money. I didn't want to fight as a professional, and some people were very critical of this. I remember after I won the bronze medal at the World Championships, a newspaper reporter came to talk to me. I told him that I wanted to stay in Cuba and study, and that was the headline the next day. After reading the story, a Cuban came to talk to me and said they can help me. I didn't have an opportunity like that in Puerto Rico. Wilfredo and I kept in touch after that moment. From all of his recollections, Wilfredo Gomez thoroughly enjoyed his time in Cuba. He even planned at some point to continue his education. But everything that provided him a sense of comfort was back in Puerto Rico. He was not as invested in academics as he was in creating a better life for his family. Fallon stayed in Cuba, but they wanted to convince me to stay here too, he said. But it was never an option. There was no money there. Fallon lived there for 15 years and never came back. They offered me a lot of things, such as a house, a chauffeur, but I said no. What Gomez had accomplished was unprecedented. Not only had he beaten the Cuban gold medalist 2 times, but he also recorded consecutive knockouts to earn his status as the best amateur fighter in the world at his weight class. The acclaim intensified. That group of boxers in Cuba was so good. Sugar Ray Leonard and others couldn't beat those guys. They thought Teofilo Stevenson would beat Ali back then, said Rafael Bracero. All Cubans remember Gomez from that time and they talk about it. They talk about Felix Trinidad, but Gomez was the best. Gomez was something like Ray Robinson. I have been dealing my whole life with Gomez. I remember making interviews with Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard, and they all knew about Gomez. What Gomez accomplished in Cuba easily compared with anything he would accomplish in his professional career. That level of dominance was incomparable. Along with his success, Gomez began to experience the side effects of a knuckle injury on his left hand that would linger for decades. He re-injured that hand during the visit to Cuba, and the injury became a matter for real concern. It was the knuckles on my left hand that I fractured when I was in Cuba. I could fight, but I suffered inflammation. The knuckles had got sore in the fights, but nothing that affected my mobility. And my hands were small. So I hurt them because of the amount of force I put on the other fighter. By the time Gomez got back to San Juan, a contingent was already eagerly awaiting his arrival. All the people from Las Monjas went to the airport, and they made me a big parade, he said. All of those people escorted me back to my house. My father was so happy. He was jumping with joy. Boxing managers lined up to meet with him. No longer a secret, Gomez had made himself the star, the best young boxer in the country, and it was impossible for the great managers of that time to ignore him. My mother was very shy, Gomez recalled. They were all trying to get me. The people were very happy. He was beautiful in the ring, a fighter who provided a masterclass in exhibiting world-class defence and power. No longer was Gomez a mere talking point for the boxing purist. Now he was a commodity, and managers from around the world came to see him. Rafael Bracero would go on to say, I knew him as an amateur. He was a wonderful boy who came from a poor area. He was such an outstanding amateur boxer. He was dealing with a lot of problems at home. He had a lot of ability. Enrique Carrion developed a technique and his power. Being courted by women, fans and well-wishers was not the typical style for Gomez and his family, but the magnificent performances in Cuba capitulated Gomez to superstardom. There was no limit to what he could accomplish as a professional, and there was no way to avoid the notion that everyone wanted a piece of the teenager. In fact, Wilfredo's mother Paula occasionally hid in the bathroom to stay clear of the deluge of fans coming his way. There were 3 journalists, and the door was open, and they came in to talk to me, and she ran into the bathroom to hide, he said. She was shy. She was a private person. Once managers, such as Tito Lector, Bob Arum, and Panama's Carlos Ileta, began to make offers. Gomez knew he could not do it alone. 3 people who had a voice in the matter were his father, his uncle Jorge Marquez Gomez, and his trainer Enrique Carrion. At first, Marquez Gomez recalled that Jacobo was reluctant to sign because he didn't want his son to sign a professional contract without making sure it was a fair one. Lector made several offers, Gomez recalled, and Bob Arum offered very little. Whether or not to sign became a point of contention within the family. Wilfredo knew that he only had one choice to make because his family had experienced poverty, and this was his chance to get them a much better place. So when he was offered the opportunity to stay in Cuba, it was an easy decision to make. Conversely, for Jacobo, it was not just about the money. He wanted what was best for his son, and he recognised the magnitude of the decision they were about to make. Marquez Gomez stepped in to help advise both men on the benefits and detriments of signing a contract. Often, the three of them would meet at Marquez Gomez's home to discuss the conditions of each offer. At the time, I didn't know much about boxing, said Marquez Gomez. Wilfredo brought Enrique Carrion to my house and introduced him to me. The intent was to teach me about boxing. I didn't know anything at the time. Marquez Gomez had little time to grasp the rudiments of the sport. Learning the sport was one thing that he would only obtain through experience and attending bouts, but the business side did not provide such a steep learning curve. A doctor from Mexico who worked with amateur fighters came to the house and there was a discussion about managing Wilfredo, but it never materialised. They had preliminary discussions with the doctor and nothing more. As gregarious as a Jacobo was, at home and with friends, he was not budging on allowing his son to sign a contract and go professional. Wilfredo really wanted to turn pro, said Marquez Gomez. His father, Jacobo, was not interested. For a while, they were at a standstill. After a few months of talking, Wilfredo went to my mother's home. He said that if his father wouldn't sign the contract, I will go by myself. I talked to Jacobo and said, let's think about that. What options do we have? I advised him that it would have been much better with Jacobo's authorisation than a kid doing it on his own. A week later, Wilfredo confirmed that he would sign the contract and he needed Marquez Gomez to talk to the manager in order to make sure about the fight negotiations. The manager, Yamil Chade, was a handsome dark-haired man of a Cuban and Lebanese descent. Not only was he a shrewd businessman, but he was also gifted in the art of persuasion. More importantly, Chade shifted the attention away from his fighters and back to his flamboyant personality. One of his associates would perfectly anoint him a lovable rascal. Other fighters whom he worked with would refer to him as a genius or a crook, but no one could deny that he was necessary for Gomez's growth. Gomez needed someone to navigate the treacherous boxing waters, and Chade had more connections than anyone. He was connected to Panama landowner Carlos Ileta, who was the manager of the man many considered to be the best boxer in the world, Roberto Duran, Gomez's idol. Ileta was strict but fair and treated Duran like his son. Duran's father, Margarito, abandoned the family home before the child turned 2 years old, and the wound never truly healed. Ileta did everything in his power to try and soften the edges of a rough childhood that was marred by poverty. Ileta was permanently located in Panama, while Chade had homes in Panama and Puerto Rico. Both men complemented each other well. My original contract with Chade was to talk to him about Wilfredo turning professional and what his position was, said Marquez Gomez. At the time, Wilfredo was eager to turn pro, but his father wasn't. From Gomez's recollections, his father only was concerned with his own happiness. He said, I don't remember having a conflict with my father. I was 18 years old. He told me, you can do what you please. He never presented an obstacle for my goal. He gave me a blessing to do what I wanted. The young fighter looked to his uncle to take the reins regarding the business side. I spoke with Chade about finding a time and place where we can meet to discuss the contract, said Marquez Gomez. We wanted to all get together to meet. We decided to meet in Chade's room in Hotel San Juan. When we got to the room, Chade then started talking about signing with Ileta. But I did not know Ileta at the time, so I said to Chade, we can go with you, but not Ileta. I didn't know Ileta, so I was willing to work with Chade, and I prepared a contract. However, as intimate as the negotiations may have been among Wilfredo, Jorge and Yamil, Wilfredo recalls the events a little differently. According to Wilfredo, Ileta was always a major part of the proceedings and never was excluded from the negotiations. Although Jorge was hesitant to conduct business with Ileta, that never stopped Ileta from playing an integral role in the process. Wilfredo said, Ileta sent Chade to do the contracts. Ileta couldn't come. At the time, Jorge did not know anything about Ileta or much about boxing. The only thing that Jorge knew was that Ileta was the manager of Roberto Duran. Chade and Ileta were business partners. It worked well because if I had a problem with one of them, I could talk to the other guy. Marquez Gomez's unwillingness to work with Ileta did not end negotiations, but it strained them. Still, Marquez Gomez crafted an agreement that all parties signed. The key was to secure a $15,000 bonus for Wilfredo. Wilfredo gave $13,000 to his father to buy a taxi, and he kept about $2,000. Later, he would buy his mother a home, said Marquez Gomez. My father was so happy when I gave him the money, remembered Wilfredo. They came from Panama, and when they made the offer for a 4-year contract, I leapt at the opportunity. I knew it would help my father, and it took me out of poverty. When Gomez first signed the contract, he had to explain its rudiments. Most people thought I signed with Chide, but that was not it. Chide was my co-manager according to the deal. What was clear was that Chide and Aleta cornered the market on Latin superstars. If Duran was the world's best fighter, Gomez was about to break away as his best-kept secret. Chide calls Aleta and says, Carlos, look, I have your next Roberto Duran. Immediately, the discussion turned back to Panama and Aleta's influence in the country. Now, at the time, Panama's military had been financing the sport, and consequently the best trainers and boxers hailed from Panama. Chide and Aleta saw this as an opportunity to jumpstart Gomez's career without the fanfare and celebrity distractions that accompanied any young star. Even though Gomez had not fought one professional bout, his star had shone brightly. In the ring, Gomez had perfected moves that took veteran fighters years to learn. He was a quick study, and his accomplishments as a world amateur champion did not tell the entire story. Yamil told me, we need to get Wilfredo out of Puerto Rico and bring him to Panama, said Marquez Gomez. And that's where Wilfredo had his early fights. Aleta had experience with hometown fighters and the distractions that they face on a daily basis. His champion in 1974, Roberto Duran, was constantly besieged by people who wanted something from him. Even when Duran went on a morning jog, people stopped him. If Aleta could help it, he would at least stem the flow of followers when it came to his newly signed fighter. In the beginning, Chide wanted me to stay in Puerto Rico, said Wilfredo. But Aleta thought it would be good if I can stay away from here and all of the influences. Aleta was always strict, and he didn't want people taking me out and distracting me. He was polite. He wanted me to train and nothing else. Even though I loved Puerto Rico, I was only 17, and I would mature in Panama. Also, Panama and Puerto Rico were a lot alike. By the time Gomez began to make his home in Panama, Duran was already a star. In fact, he was in the midst of establishing himself as the greatest 135-pounder of all time. Panamanians looked at Duran with the same awe that Puerto Ricans viewed Gomez. But now Gomez was on his turf, sharing his manager. I spoke to Duran, said Gomez. Duran told Aleta this young guy would be the next champion of the world. But I never talked to Duran specifically about Aleta. It didn't take long for Gomez to quickly make his name as a can't-miss future champion. While training exclusively in Panama in the early 1970s, Gomez worked with Plamito Espinosa, a fine young trainer who, similar to most boxers in Panama, had a rare understanding of what makes fighters tick. Plamito's brother, Saul Plomo Espinosa, trained Duran. Plamito would pick up where Carrion left off. Entrenched in boot camp, Gomez acclimatised himself to the Panamanian boxing mindset of hard work and complete devotion to the sport. No fighter wants to be away from home, but Gomez did not need much convincing to accept Panama as his home away from home. Gomez stayed in an apartment on Avenida Central in Panama City. From the beginning, Gomez showed faith in Aleta as a manager and could rely on him for support in Panama. He said, Panama is where I learned everything. I graduated from boxing school there. It was the best boxing school in the world. That is where I perfected my lateral movement and where I learnt to move from side to side. I learned to do a move where I would come in with my lead left hook and then follow up with my straight right hand. The Panamanians claim to have invented that technical style of boxing. They were very technical and very polished boxers. Gomez was arriving in Panama during the golden era of boxing. In 1972, Panama had 4 world title holders and had begun to earn the reputation as the cradle of champions. Most of the great champions hailed from Colón, a poor city on the coast that produced such great fighters as Ismael Laguna, Ernesto Marcel and Antonio Buche Amaya. Factor in the great bantamweight Eusebio Pedrosa and the slick Hilario Zapata to the mix, and Panamanian contingent could compete with any country in the world as a boxing superpower. Gomez often trained with another bantamweight champion in Jorge Lejean. Jorge Lejean was ranked number 1 in the world at the time, and I learnt a lot from him, said Gomez. The move mirrored the same approach that manager Eduardo Roman took when he sent his young prospect Alexis Arguello to Panama to start his career. Roman had cultivated military contacts in Panama, and when he was frustrated with Arguello's development in Nicaragua, he turned to Panama for what he considered was a necessary change. Thus, Roman fired Mexican trainer Pepe Morales in the early stages of Arguello's career and inserted respected Panamanian trainer Curro Dosman. Eventually, Roman would also use his leverage in Panama to set up an ill-advised showdown with Panamanian legend Marcel. At the time, Arguello was not ready for such a seasoned boxer. However, Arguello would grow into an all-time great and one of the best 130-pounders ever. Arguello and Gomez meeting at 130 pounds in the future proved tantalising, but also never materialised. That fight with Alexis was never considered because when he was at 130 pounds, I was at 122, said Gomez. It was a possibility. We could have met at 130, but nothing was ever done about it. He was my friend. I had a lot of admiration for him. He was also very tall for his weight class, but I can't say who would win in an eventual fight. It would not be fair to say that. Similarly, Gomez took advantage of Aleita's influence in Panama to receive the best apprenticeship in the sport, as he fought 5 of his first 6 fights in Panama. Although Arguello emerged much earlier than Gomez, they still spoke nostalgically about their experiences in Panama. In Panama, the trainers taught me how to fight and use my instincts off the ropes, Gomez said. I had to fight intelligently off the ropes, but I also learned the hook to the liver and how to properly throw combinations. All of those things came from Plamito. I also learned the dirty tricks in the 3 years I was there. You know, how to use my head and elbows, especially on defence. Ironically, in some boxing publications, Gomez was erroneously referred to as a Panamanian featherweight, but the oversight never seemed to bother him, as he took it in his stride when he said, "Panama is like my second home." Once Gomez was taught a new skill or technique, he homed in on it. Years later, Gomez would have already learned everything he needed in the ring, but as a 19-year-old, he needed to be a top-flight student. They taught me how to dance off the ropes, he said. I had extraordinary skills and used natural movement. In Panama, they emphasised the foot movement. Duran and Gomez were both recognised for their fabulous punching power. Neither fighter relied on a knockout punch, but both were assassins when it came down to wearing down their opponents with combinations. Later on in their careers, both fighters would experience parallel career trajectories, although Gomez's candle would burn out much sooner. In the early 1970s, no one wanted to spar with Duran in the ring, whether it was a sparring session or a professional bout. Duran fought with uncontrollable rage. Conversely, Gomez was more tactical in his sessions. As they shared boxing gyms in Panama, an eventual showdown was inevitable. One day, Duran called out Gomez, and the Puerto Rican obliged. At the time, Gomez did not feel he had an option. If he did not accept the challenge, he might have lost respect. Duran and I never met as professionals because we were always fighting at different weight classes, and we were too far apart, he said. But one time, he called me to get in the ring with him. I got in there and started playing with him. I was too fast for him, and I won the sparring session. He wanted to knock me out, but I was too fast for him. I didn't fear him. I knew I could dominate, and I did. I remember him saying, "This Puerto Rican, I cannot see him." After being challenged by Duran, Gomez knew he could not back down. By all accounts, Gomez did well against the champion. If Gomez were to gain respect in Panama, he had to face Duran's fire and intensity. Having bested Duran in the sparring session, Gomez knew that he could learn from the great lightweight. He said, "I modelled myself after Duran's style. I like how he always went forward towards his opponent." Developing a rapport with Espinosa became instrumental for their working relationship to thrive. Espinosa brought a level of expertise that surpassed any of Gomez's former trainers. Nevertheless, as Gomez learned something new each day, the knuckle problem persisted. After every session, Espinosa had Gomez put his hand in ice to heal the injured knuckles. Chade was well aware of the issue and went behind the scenes to channel his concerns. "My knuckles were dislocated, so I took a shot before each fight to control the pain," said Gomez. "My power punch was my left hook. Espinosa would put my hands in ice or hot water with salts to lessen the inflammation. Later on in my career, when I fought against Lupe Pintor and Juan Laporte, I felt an excruciating pain in my hand. So to start his career, on the 16th of November 1974, Carlos Ileta put Gomez in with Panamanian bantamweight Jancito Fuentes, who was 2-1 and was coming off a decision loss to Eusebio Pedrosa. Gomez fought at 117 3/4 pounds, while Fuentes weighed 119.5 pounds. Gomez was being paid $1,000 for his pro debut, but in comparison, Duran had been paid $25 in 1968 to fight Carlos Mendoza in his own debut. Ironically, Gomez shared centre stage with Duran, who, at 45-1, easily knocked out Alberto Vanguez in one round. It was a match that Gomez was supposed to win. When he drew with Fuentes, the performance failed to evoke rave reviews from the critics. At the time, Gomez was still the heralded amateur trying to find his identity. He said, "I thought it would be easy. They made the fight because they thought it would be a good draw for the crowd. My supporters were sad and disillusioned that I didn't win by knockout. I fought Fuentes like an amateur. I was too polite. I can't say I won the fight because I had just come back from the Olympics and my style was so different. It was hard for me to adapt to the professional ranks, and it took time. I can't say if they stole the fight from me or not. But there was more to it. So much hype had surrounded Gomez that some forgot how much pressure the fighter actually faced. Not only did he have to move away from home and his family, but he also had to understand how to navigate the rough professional territory. Because everything had become so easy for him, it wasn't hard to forget that he only had recently turned 18. I felt a lot of pressure about fighting and making my debut in Panama, he said, where a lot had been said about me. It was not unusual for great fighters to experience setbacks early in their careers. The important thing was for Gomez to get back into the gym and learn from his mistakes. Still, there was a backlash as the new golden child of Panamanian boxing struggled to showcase his professional skills. I was 18 years old, so it was hard, he said. Duran said publicly, "You paid $15,000 to this guy, and you paid me $300? I felt sad because I'd let the Panamanian people down." In the ring, what Gomez did so effortlessly as a world amateur champion did not necessarily translate to the professional ranks. So when he drew with Fuentes in the professional debut, Gomez recognised the differences between the amateur and the professional spectrum. It's also not unusual to see a great fighter struggle in his or her professional debut. It's nearly impossible to simulate all of the things that occurred in training. Outside the ring, Gomez also missed his family and his people, and he said, "After that draw with Fuentes, my trainers really focused on giving me more technique. When you are fighting as an amateur, it's so different. It was a different regime. I had to learn more technique." After that first draw with Fuentes, Gomez returned to the gym, but it was Chade who started to backtrack on his initial fascination with the wondrous talent. Even he admitted later that it was Gomez's damaged hands that created such stress that he looked for an escape. One evening, when he was sitting with his journalist friends, Chu Garcia and Engel Olivares and rum distiller Salvador Villela, Chade tried to negotiate his way out of his current managerial status with Gomez. Chade recalled the incident in his autobiography, Low Blows, by stating that he worried that Gomez would hurt his hands irreparably in the near future. Chade claimed to have offered the contract for less than $20,000. Olivares recalled the meeting and brief negotiation process slightly differently. "Yes, that is true," he said. "He offered me the contract for $10,000. It was me, myself, Yamil, Salvador Villela and Chu." Why he offered the contract? Well, that was the $1 million question. We all had a very good relationship, and he just made the offer. Yamil was always a businessman. I don't know, maybe he made the mistake of thinking that Wilfredo was not as good as what he was supposed to be. I mean, it seems unlikely that during that, Chade was so naive as to make such a reckless proposition. But after that evening, the men did not speak about the incident. As Chade so eloquently put it, "Then and there, I promised myself I would forget this diabolical plot and keep it from Gomez's knowledge." But the men did not have the funds to buy the contract and take over as Gomez's managerial team, so nothing ever came of the supposed plot. As keen as Chide was, the mere consideration of such an offer revealed at the very least how limited he was in certain areas. Gomez had his entire career in front of him, and Chide was willing to part ways over a hand injury that subsequently would never hinder Gomez throughout his glorious time in the ring. I did not ask Chide why. Salvador did not ask him why, and Chew did not ask him why he made the offer, said Olivares. After we got the offer, and we did not have the money, it was never discussed again. It was mentioned once but then forgotten, but I do not recall any talk about Wilfredo's injured hands. Maybe it was true. Now, over the next 2 years, Gomez went on to an 11-0 streak with 11 knockouts. He fought his first 6 fights in Panama, and then after he knocked out Fuentes in a rematch in June of 1975, Gomez returned to Puerto Rico to continue his career. One of the early victories that revealed Gomez's toughness was over local fighter Andres Puppy Hernandez. Going into the bout, on December the 20th, 1975, Hernandez had notched 23 victories and 3 defeats. Gomez, 7-0-1, was his first opponent of any real substance. Needing 8 rounds to stop Hernandez, Gomez still passed an early test. Puppy Hernandez was a prospect, said Olivares. He had no punch, but he was a good prospect for Wilfredo because of his experience. He was also smart and intelligent and a good stylist. He was loved by the Puerto Rican people and was very charismatic. He knew how to fight. Wilfredo was super. I told him that even though it was only his 9th fight, he could fight world champion Ruben Olivares from Mexico. In his 10th professional bout, on the 20th of February 1976, Gomez fought Connell Hall on a Don King card in Puerto Rico. Gomez quickly dispatched of Hall in 3 rounds and stayed around to watch the great Muhammad Ali knock out Jean-Pierre Koopman in 5 rounds. Adoring fans paid $200 for ringside seats, while Gomez got a close-up look at the international icon and how he handled himself. Gomez benefited greatly from the 10,000 fans who crammed into the Roberto Clemente Coliseum and the 11,500 who watched from Hiram Bithorn Stadium next door. Around this time, a newspaper report by columnist Dick Young wrote about a future lightweight champ named Wilfredo Gomez. Leading up to the bout in San Juan, Gomez was afforded an up-close and personal look at Ali. It would be his only real access to the boxing legend, but Gomez was taking mental notes at each turn. In preparation for Ali's arrival, a makeshift ring was built in the Hotel San Juan. Wilfredo trained at Malta Corona Gym at the 22nd Street bus stop, but he would run into Ali each morning on Pinoza Street on Isla Verde. He said he was a guy with a lot of charisma, and he liked to speak a lot. He was running in the morning, and we were running too. We met by coincidence. Ali started joking and running with me. Then he started shadowboxing with me. At the time, it was an honour for me, a lot of prestige. I was unknown, and Ali was very important. Immediately after Gomez stopped hauling 3 rounds, he quickly changed and got back out there to see Ali's performance. He was not disappointed. He said, "He was a great technician and very fast. I learnt a lot just watching him. Ali didn't get hit often, and he had a fast jab. He was a very friendly guy. It didn't matter who you were. He would speak to the taxi driver, the cleaner. It didn't matter who you were. The Puerto Rican people loved him." Anybody who knew Gomez also referenced his willingness to engage others. It was a trait that many attribute to Gomez's father, a man who loved being around others. Ali made everybody feel great, Gomez said. He never acted like he was above anybody. I felt I was similar to Ali in that regard. I always liked to speak with everybody. Somehow, even at that stage in his career, people were already anointing Gomez as the next great Latin champ. By late March of that year, Gomez had earned a WBC ranking as the 6th best bantamweight in the world, behind respected fighters such as Eusebio Pedrosa, Carlos Zarate and Sean O'Grady. Since there was no official 122-pound division between the bantamweights and featherweights, Gomez would have to earn his stripes at 118 pounds, which was where he fought in the amateur ranks. One of the main reasons that Gomez came back to Puerto Rico was that he started to become such a big draw that Chade wanted to take advantage of his popularity and make him a household name back home. By the summer of 1975, with the exception of a bout in Managua, Nicaragua, Gomez would begin to fight exclusively out of Puerto Rico. I fought Antonio da Silva, and he was a good boxer, but at that time I was too strong for him, said Gomez. I came back and knocked out Jose Jimenez with a left hook to the liver. Later, Carlos Ileta had a contract and decided to make a show in Nicaragua, and I knocked out Cleo Garcia. I learned a lot in Panama. I started to keep my guard up more, and I became a better boxer. For Gomez, it was a special time. He had graduated from the Panamanian School of Boxing Education and still received the perks from it. He stayed with Plamito as his number one trainer and utilised Carlos Ileta's prolific boxing contacts. But instead of fighting primarily in Panama, Gomez's handlers began to take advantage of the Puerto Rican fan base. Still, Gomez decided against moving back to Puerto Rico full-time. Instead, the young prospect trained in Panama to avoid distractions and fought the majority of his fights in Puerto Rico. He said, I trained better in Panama and I was able to relax. I was a big draw in Puerto Rico. More than 10, 12 or 15,000 people were coming to the fights. The promoter, Pepito Cordero, could drop another anchor there. I was slim and good-looking too, but I never trained with the same intensity there because there were too many distractions. Yet, it was not those bouts in Panama that gave Gomez the most difficulty. On the 19th of July 1976, Gomez prepared to get in the ring with the 21-year-old Alberto Davila, a Mexican-American boxer who had an impressive record of 19-3 with only 5 knockouts. Most of the opponents Gomez had faced up to that point of his career had either padded their records against inferior competition or were local fighters who he was keenly aware of. But Davila was a different proposition. Even though he had lost 3 bouts, he had already beaten future Hall of Famer Lupe Pinto in February and would later win the WBC version of the bantamweight title in 1984. Davila was a regular at the Olympic Auditorium, and despite a loss to the less heralded Raul Tirado, he was improving with each bout. Gomez, 11-0-1 with 11 KOs, needed every new technique in his repertoire to turn away Davila. In the opening round, Gomez danced to Davila's left and shot a jab to offset Davila's. Davila rolled with Gomez's first punch, a glancing right hand. By showing Davila respect in the first round, Gomez recognised that it would not be a quick defence, and he would not be able to dominate Davila. What was clear about that first round was Davila's ring maturation. He was a seasoned fighter, which was evidenced by the passing grade that Davila received on the infighting. In the same round, Gomez trapped Davila against the ropes, only to miss a 5-punch combination. Yet, as effective as Davila was defensively, he also counterpunched well, and after being raked with a hook to the head, he returned fire with his own right hand. By virtue of being more aggressive against the counterpuncher, Gomez won the first round, but he missed a lot of punches in the process. Conversely, Davila kept his composure and never allowed Gomez to douse his fighting spirit. A round later, both fighters were content to engage, but did not establish a consistent attack. Not in top condition, Gomez could not fight with the same vigour that defined his previous 11 bouts, and occasionally absorbed some punches, including a flush uppercut toward the middle of the round. But Gomez also had his moments, as he jumped in with 2 hooks, which eventually led to more punishment. Cornering Davila again, Gomez landed a fierce right hand and raked Davila's eyes instead of pulling the glove away. It had quickly become more difficult for Davila to cope with the pressure until the final 20 seconds of the round, when the Los Angeles native shot a right hand and then caught Gomez with a counter jab as he was walking in. Davila was difficult because he was so hard to hit, Gomez said. A real fight was occurring for the highly touted Gomez, but it may have been his most significant lesson to date. He could not take any opponent lightly or not train without purpose. He was slower in his movements, and his punches were not as sharp. Instead of rapidly circling and subsequently studying Davila, Gomez moved with caution and missed often. Consequently, Davila took more risks in the third round. One of Davila's most effective punches was a check left hook that landed in the round, turning southpaw. Gomez wanted to position himself to land a lead left hook, but quickly returned to his conventional style. In the last minute of the round, Gomez missed with a right hand and then landed a jarring uppercut, which initiated an aggressive response from Davila. Before getting out of the third round, Gomez threw an elbow that grazed Davila and later crouched down to unload and land the best punch of the fight, a crushing uppercut. After that punch, Gomez scored on 2 more occasions, but Davila deftly bobbed and weaved out of harm's way. The bell soon sounded. Between rounds, Gomez was already breathing heavily. Despite reverting back to his jab in the fourth, Gomez was not able to properly capitalise on his success in round 3, and even absorbed counter hooks from Davila. But Gomez came back with his own left hook that jolted Davila. What was clear to Gomez was that he was in for the long haul. In the fifth, he closed out the round in style as he landed 4 or 5 punches that temporarily stopped Davila. They squared off at the sound of the bell, but then motioned back to their respective corners. There was no love lost between the fighters as Gomez accused Davila of trying to blind him. He said, "He was sticking the finger in my eye, and I was scared that I would never fight again." Opening up the sixth with wild left hooks, Gomez showed a sense of urgency. He landed nice combinations and a left uppercut that he positioned perfectly on the side of Davila's jaw. Moving around the ring but staying close to the ropes, Davila was economical with his counter-punching. With a little more than a minute remaining in the round, the Puerto Rican crowd rose as Gomez scored with a 5-punch combination and then kept punishing Davila, who merely looked to survive the onslaught. Trading with Gomez was not the best option, as Davila's right hands were no match for Gomez's fiery straight right. As the seconds ticked off, the momentum was clearly changing. Espinosa ran out to meet Gomez in the middle of the ring at the end of the 6th round, a staple move that the trainer felt preserved Gomez's energy. Yet, the 7th round proved uneventful. With the exception of a straight right and an uppercut, Gomez did not attempt to match the same punch output that he exhibited in the previous round. In an act of sportsmanship, Gomez bowed and touched gloves with Davila after his left hook that was thrown after the referee's call for break. However, the next 6 minutes reflected a different reality as Davila had to find a way to offset a reinvigorated Gomez. No longer was Gomez relying on 2 or 3 punch combinations. He threw nearly 30 punches in a short span early in the 8th. Even though only 6 or 7 punches landed cleanly, Davila, as tough as he was, gradually slowed. When Gomez was not doubling and tripling up on the left hooks, he was feinting and pot-shotting Davila with unanswered lead right hands. The pace quickened, and it clearly benefited Gomez. Refusing to succumb, Davila fought back valiantly. Some fighters have an innate ability to know exactly when to push forward for a knockout, and for Gomez, that moment often occurred within a split second. When he made that irrevocable decision not to turn back, his opponent had no recourse. Early in that 9th and final round, Gomez missed with arm punches and then sized up Davila for a left uppercut to his chest and then followed with one to the head that sent him reeling. Despite his ability to tolerate Gomez's power, Davila was hurt. Initially, Davila lay flat for 4 seconds and then rose to his feet at the count of 5. Gomez paced. It was seconds before he would pounce on his prey. Hovering over the referee, Gomez stepped around Davila to throw several left hooks and uppercuts. None of them hurt Davila, but Gomez succeeded in stunning him and pushing him back into the ropes. Then Gomez unleashed a straight right hand and left hook, which opened up a barrage of punches that caused the referee to step in. Suddenly, the fight was not over, as an enraged Gomez physically forced himself past the referee and nearly on top of Davila, whose cornerman calmly put his hand up as if to stop Gomez if he did get past trainer Plamito Espinosa, who ran over and bear-hugged him. After the chaotic ending to the fight, Davila went over to Gomez to shake his hand, but Gomez turned away. As his handlers hoisted him up, Gomez listened for the announcer to confirm his 12th straight knockout, which came at 40 seconds of the 9th round. "It was a great fight," said Gomez. "Davila was considered a veteran. I knocked him out in the 9th round. I was upset because Davila took his thumb and put it in my eye. Then I went after him. I thought I lost my eye because of that thumbing." Most Puerto Rican fans had seen Gomez hit after the bell or even land some low blows, but rarely, if ever, did he appear as uncontrollable. "I thought I'd lost my eye, and I pushed away the referee. I pushed him aside so I could keep hitting Davila. Davila never apologised for what he did. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to finish him for good. The learning curve was steep when it came to the first half of a fighter's career. Only in his 13th professional bout, Gomez quickly learned that professionals are expected to maintain composure no matter how hard an opponent tries to coax him or her by taking verbal or physical measures. I learned right away that boxing was very brutal, he said. I felt bad because I let him get under my skin. That was one of the first times that had happened. I can't show my skills when I'm angry. It's like fighting in the streets with no rules. It's very dangerous. Covering the fight at ringside, Angel Olivares had high praise for Gomez. He said, "That was a good test for Gomez. That was the thing. He didn't have a game plan. He just threw punches, was hard to reach, and Davila had experience, but he had nothing to prove more than showing that he could go the distance," Olivares recalled. If you had seen Wilfredo in those years, training or in person, you had to concur that he would be a super fighter. I went up to him and I told him, after Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard, you are next, even though you fight at a lower weight class. After the difficult victory over Davila, Gomez's camp started to consider a possible title shot. Initially, Gomez's camp wanted to take on Alfonso Zamora, who had made 4 defences of his WBA bantamweight crown. But the bout never materialised, and through the press that August, Chide said he had given up hope that Zamora would put his title on the line against Gomez. Chide was persistent in his attempt to confirm that bout as he travelled to Mexico on numerous occasions. They had even agreed in writing for the bout, but Zamora's team nixed it because it claimed the money was not there. There was no urgency. Only 7 months later, Jose Suleiman would approve the new junior featherweight division, a 122-pound division strategically located between the bantamweights and featherweights, and that was the perfect fit for Gomez, who struggled mightily to make 118 pounds and lacked the height to compete with some of the champions at 126 pounds. From August 1976 to February 1977, Gomez earned 3 more victories that lasted a total of 8 rounds as he knocked out Tony Rocha, Jose Murillo Medel and John Menza. Against Medel on the 11th of October 1976, Gomez, who won by a 4th-round knockout, earned the praise of referee Zach Clayton, who said, "I had heard about him, but I could not imagine that he was that good. He's a world champion in the making. He never lost his cool, and he knew when the end was near." Boxing experts reinforced Clayton's belief that Gomez was of the can't-miss variety. Gomez was establishing himself as a feared knockout artist as he compiled 15 KOs in as many victories. The only blemish on his record was the debut draw to Fuentes in 1974. Even though Gomez only had 16 fights, which was often not enough to fight for a world title, the team felt that he was more than prepared for a title shot. In comparison, Roberto Duran had 28 fights when he faced Ken Buchanan for the title, and Alexis Arguello had more than 30 fights and was not close to being ready to fight Ernesto Marcel for the featherweight crown in his first attempt at a world title. Gomez's swift maturation process was clear to anyone who witnessed his progression. Chide organised the fight and Pepito Cordero promoted it. Gomez's people were not taking any risks. Keeping Gomez in Panama was necessary in order to get him mentally prepared. They knew what their fighter was capable of in the ring, but the hoopla surrounding the bout in Puerto Rico may have been too much to handle for the young fighter, who at this point had established a nice rapport with the press. Gomez sparred with Jorge Lujan and worked on his speed with another excellent Panamanian slickster, Hilario Zapata. "I stayed the whole time in Panama," he said. "I didn't come back to Puerto Rico. I remember Yum looked at me and said, 'He's a baby,' and that he would knock me out in 2 rounds. But he underestimated me." By the time South Korean WBC Super Bantamweight champion Dong Kyun-yum defended his 122-pound crown against Gomez in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Yum had already fought over 50 bouts and was on the downside of his career. To many fight fans, the 122-pounders were a fairly new group of fighters. The first Super Bantamweight title match occurred on the 3rd of April 1976 in Panama City. Panamanian Rigoberto Riasco stopped Philip Nakayama in the 9th round to win the newly created title. Many insiders speculated as to the reasoning behind the newly formed division. Some cited hefty sanctioning fees for Jose Sulaiman and the WBC, while others surmised that the 122-pound division provided the perfect division to allow Gomez to show his wares. Anyone who was familiar with Gomez knew that 118 pounds was going to be impossible to make, and 126 pounds was a couple of pounds away from his comfort zone. 7 months after Riasco earned the title, Yum had taken control of it. Gomez said, "I think Jose Sulaiman created the title for me at that moment. I would have moved up and fought at 126 if the division was not created. But I was at my best at 122. I was much stronger and it was easy for me to make the weight. It was a natural weight for me. I was very comfortable." At the time, the man who is the current WBC president, Mauricio Sulaiman, the son of the late Jose Sulaiman, was an adolescent when Gomez was coming up the ranks as a 118-pounder. Back then, the WBC needed to find a place for Gomez, and neither the 118 division or the 126 division were great options. "It meant a lot to my father to have a fighter like Wilfredo at 122 pounds, said Mauricio. "My father's visionary administration was criticised often for the creation of an intermediate division. 122 was created as the intermediate division to offset the 118 and 126 pounders. Wilfredo helped answer the question as to why we needed a new division at 122 pounds, because it was a tremendous sacrifice for fighters to make 118, and it was taking advantage of fighters at 126. That was why the WBC created the 122-pound division. Wilfredo gave legitimacy to that change. He was a great model of success at that intermediate weight class. It was not an easy sell to get Yum to come to Puerto Rico. Chade used his influence with Sulaiman to cement that title shot, even though Gomez had only really beaten one named fighter in Alberto Davila. Everyone knew Gomez's capabilities, so it wasn't a huge shock that he quickly catapulted to that title shot. The champion, Yum, and his manager, Sabaru Arashida, president of Kyoto Promotions, had the power to dictate the terms of the fight, but Chade had valuable connections. Working with Argentinian matchmaker Luis Spada, then manager of Panama flyweight Hilario Zapata, Chade was able to use Spada's influence to confirm that San Juan, Puerto Rico, would be the setting for the big super bantamweight clash. One of the stipulations was that Chade sign a 3-fight contract for Gomez's first 3 defences with Raul Tirado, Royal Kobayashi and Juan Antonio Lopez. The joint promotion included managers Chade, Arashida and Spada, while young Puerto Rican Luis Raul Marquez handled the promotional obligations. Additionally, things were changing for Gomez regarding his maturation process. He said, "By the time I met Yum, I had learned to hit and not get hit. I learned how to combine the left hook with an uppercut to the liver or the head." In 1977, Yum was making the 3rd defence of his title. It had not been an easy journey for the South Korean, who had entered the fight with a record of 47 wins, 2 losses and 6 draws, with 20 coming by way of knockout. Yum had lost his first attempt at a world title when he dropped a highly controversial 15-round split decision to Panama's Rigoberto Riasco in August of 1976. Jose Sulaiman had created the new super bantamweight division in 1976, and Riasco was the first to hold the title since the weight class began to gain momentum in 1922, only to quickly dissolve. Subsequently, Riasco relinquished the belt 2 months later when he was knocked out by Royal Kobayashi in 8 rounds. That loss opened the door again for Yum, who earned his 2nd title shot within a 3-month time span. This time Yum took advantage of his opportunity and won a 15-round majority decision over Kobayashi to earn the title. In his first title defence on the 13th of February 1977, Yum needed all 15 rounds to beat Jose Cervantes. At the time, Gomez was ranked number 2 in the junior featherweight class behind Cervantes. A host of mediocre fighters filled out the rest of the top 10. Now it was Gomez's turn. After the Cervantes victory, the WBC pressured Yum to defend his title against Gomez within 60 days, but he would face Shuzo Yoshida in a tune-up in Seoul, Korea before his showdown with Gomez. Yum had a lot of experience, and I knew he would be a tough fight, Gomez said. But I was young and confident. I was fighting at home, so I really felt confident. Before fighting for the title, Gomez also remembered a discussion with his father. "Go to it," Jacobo told his son. "Please don't lose." "I will win," he said, "no matter what." As is the case with so many young fighters competing for a world championship, Gomez came into the title bout over-anxious. Yum was not in Gomez's class, but few fighters were in 1977. He was a young dynamo who could do everything a great fighter was supposed to do in the ring. If Gomez needed to box, he boxed beautifully. If Gomez needed a knockout, he coolly pressed the action. If Gomez needed to win a round, he spent nearly the entire 3 minutes attacking his opponent. However, young fighters also make mistakes, and Gomez got his out of the way early on in the bout. Thus, nearly a minute into the first round, as Gomez wound up to release his vaunted left hook, he blindly walked in to a similar punch from his opponent and immediately went down. Shocked more than hurt, Gomez had made a tactical error. It was a flash knockdown, but Gomez was able to gain a couple of extra seconds of recovery time as referee Dick Young concerned himself with keeping Yum in the corner. When Gomez returned fire immediately, a stinging jab and right hand that jostled Yum quickly reminded the Puerto Rican faithful in the Roberto Clemente Coliseum that the knockdown was a fluke. But Yum stayed relentless as he tried his best to end the fight. "I got knocked down," said Gomez. "I got afraid. I thought to myself, this Korean guy was tougher than I thought. But even if I were hurt, I had too much adrenaline to feel it. No, I wasn't hurt in that first round. I got a little drowsy, but I came down from it and quickly recovered. I was okay. I was in such good condition and so well prepared that I wasn't affected." The entire arena of Puerto Rican fans fell silent when Gomez went down. They had never seen Gomez face that type of adversity. In the back of their minds, they wondered how their fighter would respond to a powerful punch that, at best, left him momentarily dazed, but not hurt. When I went back to the corner, Gomez said, Blamito said to him, "Take it easy. Don't despair. Move side to side and don't stand in front of him." Gomez recalled, "It was my first time on the canvas as a professional. Yum fought with a style that resembled Roberto Duran in many ways. The way he threw the right hand with reckless abandon, the hop step before every punch, the manner in which he reset after every combination. He even resembled Duran when he threw those wild punches and his black hair flailed back and forth. Yet Yum lacked the head movement and the speed, two attributes that Gomez utilised in abundance. Silence, remembered Olivares, like when Roberto Duran got knocked down by Esteban de Jesus in the first round. The same thing happened to Gomez, but after Wilfredo got up off the canvas after that first round, it was easy for him. Yum was a vehicle for Wilfredo. He was surprised that he was knocked down in that first round, but we knew that he would recover and beat him. Yum was a Class B fighter, not at the top of the list like a Zarate or a Zamora. As the fight progressed, Yum felt Gomez's sharp jab and right hand more frequently. In order to avoid the brunt of Gomez's incoming flurries in the second round, Yum clinched and grabbed and tried his best to slow the exceedingly fast pace that Gomez had established. On the other hand, Yum realised how vulnerable Gomez was to that left hook and landed two consecutive ones in the middle of the round. In his corner, under my worried gaze, Carrion and Espinosa tried to make him take the offensive, wrote Shade, which he did from the fourth round on, and Yum tasted repeatedly demolishing hooks to the liver, his fight going out of him with each passing round. Only his professional pride and bravery kept him standing. Still screaming at each other at the end of each round, Yum and Gomez both came back in the third and had their moments. Each time Gomez hit Yum, the WBC champ flopped and flailed, and Gomez responded again with another attack. The fans gave Gomez a standing ovation a round later as his speed, power and accuracy were on display. It was rare to see a young fighter evoke such emotion within a crowd while showcasing veteran moves. Mixing in vicious right and left uppercuts, Gomez began to dominate the fight and even hurt Yum in the sixth round. Trying to withstand the barrage of right-hand leads, Yum staggered and turned his head away from the fight completely, a desperate act. Gomez continued to forge ahead and attack. The pressure was too intense for any fighter in that weight class. The first 3 rounds were a lot harder than I expected, Gomez said. After the fourth round, I began to play with him. Battered, exhausted and virtually helpless, Yum rarely fought back. With the crowd on its feet anxiously awaiting the announcement that the kid from Las Monjas was now a world champ, Gomez obliged with ripping left hooks and shuddering straight rights that only the most resilient opponent could survive. In the 9th and 10th rounds, Gomez was supposed to slow down, but he hardly relented. He said, "I wanted to keep my knockout streak going, so I went after him." In the 12th and final round, Yum absorbed such vicious blows that a cautious referee may have stopped it after the first minute, where Gomez tripled on his hooks, raked him with a lunging hook, jarred him with an uppercut and continued to chase and punish him. Yum ran, clinched, threw a counter, covered up and then finally went down from a right cross that landed while he was in a crouching position. Yum quickly rolled over and listened as referee Dick Young counted him out. It was the most electrifying and vicious 2 minutes and 40 seconds that a fight fan could imagine. Gomez was immediately engulfed by his people as dozens stormed the ring to touch him. He was the new champion, and at 20, Gomez was on the brink of becoming the country's next hero. At the time of the stoppage, Gomez was well ahead on all three judges' scorecards. He said, "When I knocked him out, I was very emotional. It was a great moment for me because it was in Puerto Rico. That was a big advantage. I realised that all the sacrifices were worth it. It was a rags to riches story and they treated me well. They had a big tribute and honoured me. My family was very happy and I received a lot of attention. It was a lot to keep up with." Journalists and fans alike gushed over the new champion. Young, good-looking and charismatic, Gomez felt at home in any setting. That was part of his allure, along with, of course, the staple smile that melted women and put everyone around him at ease. After that fight, they all followed him, said Olivares. They all loved him. After that fight, Chade decided that Gomez would stay in Puerto Rico and begin to fill local arenas. At the time, Yamil did an unheralded deal to keep me and take Aleta out of the contract, said Gomez. Aleta wanted Chade to renegotiate, and they did. Chade paid Aleta, and that was that. Years later, Gomez would take a more proactive role in negotiations, but as the new champ, he would just tell Chade how much he wanted for the fight and how many fights he wanted per year. Aleta and Chade would handle the particulars. He said, "I wasn't really paying attention to the details. I wasn't a part of that business side." Facing Wilfredo Gomez for 3 furious minutes could be an exhausting endeavour for any fighter. There were many facets to Gomez's style. For his first defence, Gomez had to fulfil the contract with Arashida for 3 options. The first of the 3 defences was challenger Raul Torrido, who was 10, 5 and 3 at the time, who felt Gomez's power early and often in their bout at the Roberto Clemente Coliseum on the 11th of July 1977. Now, leading up to the bout, Gomez's sparring sessions were spectacles as fans and journalists alike crowded into the packed gyms. He was finally starting to understand the burden of being constantly monitored. That is why the choice to live and train in Panama proved so successful, because Gomez did not have to concern himself with the distractions of everyone wanting a piece of him. Yet Gomez had a keen understanding of how to promote himself and made it a point to integrate himself with the local boxing journalist like Chu Garcia. Now Gomez was finally where he wanted to be, home in Puerto Rico. Wilfredo was charismatic. He would spend time with the press. He was a natural. He spoke to you and knew who you were. He knew how to court the press, said an El Nuevo Dia journalist, Jose Sanchez. Now, in the first round of the bout with Torrado, Gomez wanted to impress his nearly 9,000 hometown fans. Torrado, who earned $8,000 for the bout, proved he could run, but he couldn't hide from Gomez. Gomez cut off the ring, followed Torrado incessantly, duped him with feinted and landed powerful right hand, and also a left hook to the head in another later confrontation as he was walking in and feinting away. Wherever Torrado ran for cover, Gomez was there to greet him. Gomez's magnificent head movement was on display as he made Torrado miss and miss again. If round 1 was a race, the second round turned into a fist fight. In fact, Torrado fought back valiantly off the ropes. Even though Torrado landed hard punches, especially in wild exchanges as he fought off the ropes, Gomez still bested him in the exchanges, and a straight right hand at the end of the round proved to be his best punch. It was in this round that Tirado injured Gomez's jaw with a punch. It was unclear which punch it was, but Gomez would feel the effects after the fight. The jaw injury did not have an immediate effect, and by the third round, the attrition started to show. The round began with a right hand where Gomez set himself on the inside of Tirado's front foot to land a left and straight right. Less than a minute later, Gomez tripled up on his left hooks and Tirado went down for the first time in the fight. Tirado rapidly moved to his left, but Gomez perfectly timed him with 2 more hooks. One more jarring right hand ended the round. Instead of trying to end the bout after recording the first knockdown, Gomez held back early in the fourth. For Tirado fans, the most disconcerting aspect of the fourth round was that Tirado actually fought well behind the jab before Gomez turned it on in what would be the fifth and final round. After 3 strong right hands followed by a lunging left hook, Gomez finally used an uppercut to the body to send Tirado down for the second time. This time Tirado hesitated and then went down. Surprisingly, referee Chuck Hassett picked Tirado up off the mat, forced him over to face Gomez, and then restarted the fight again. It was clearly a mistake, and referee Hassett tried to make up for it with a fast count when Tirado quickly went down again from a right hand to the body. Hassett counted him out at 2 minutes and 59 seconds of the fifth round. For the 5 rounds of action, Gomez would take home $80,000. Refusing to give Gomez credit for the victory, Tirado's manager, Pancho Rosales, blamed his fighter's loss on Gomez's incessant low blows in the fourth round and suggested that his fighter was ahead after the first 3 rounds. Still, Gomez was not content with the win, as he told one reporter, "I fought badly. I am not happy with this victory." Even great fighters tend to have one glaring flaw in their repertoire. At times, that flaw represents a lack of power or an inability to cut off the ring against exceptional boxers. On the other hand, some fighters only rely on their big punch ability. None of those weaknesses applied to Wilfredo Gomez in the late 1970s. As he prepared for his reign of the 122-pound division, Gomez knew that he would have to utilise all of the skills at his disposal. One thing was clear as Gomez began his assault on the division: each fighter brought him closer to that mantle of the world's greatest fighter. The backstory to this defence started to overshadow the fight itself. In his previous victory over Raul Tirado on the 11th of July 1977, Gomez actually fractured his jaw. He said, "In the second round, I had my mouth open and I received a punch. I kept on fighting and immediately knocked down Tirado." Originally, he was supposed to defend against Kobayashi on the 11th of August, but he still needed time to heal, so the fight was delayed on 3 occasions. Although inconsequential, the WBC threatened to strip Gomez if he didn't face Kobayashi. They finally faced each other on January the 19th, 1978 in the Municipal Stadium in Japan, nearly 5 months after the originally scheduled date. Despite experiencing a brief reign at 122 pounds in early 1976, few expected Kobayashi to pose a threat to Gomez. Facing Alexis Arguello at featherweight in 1975, Kobayashi was knocked out in 5 rounds. Gomez came into the bout weighing 121.5 pounds, while Kobayashi weighed in at 121.75 pounds. Gomez earned $175,000 for the defence. Despite being a huge favourite in the championship bout, Gomez had to deal with more unheralded dealings outside of the ring once he arrived in Japan, as Shade attempted to have him give up a significant portion of his purse to ensure a clean fight, and to make sure there was impartiality. Shade did everything possible to get Gomez to believe that the outcome of the fight was in jeopardy unless they paid off the judges. The payoff was supposed to be $50,000 in cash. Gomez tried to assuage Shade by constantly reminding him that his punches would be the guarantee, and that there was no reason to be concerned. Completely taken aback by his manager's unreasonable demands, Gomez went ahead with the suitcase scheme. And Gomez recalled the details about what happened here. He said, "When I went to the fight with Kobayashi in Japan, in defence of the super bantamweight title, Yamil says, 'Look, Wilfredo, you have to fix the judges, because we are here in Japan and we have to fight against both the public and against the judges. We must pay $50,000 to have control of the judges.' And I say, 'Yamil, I do not have the money.' And he tells me, 'Well, I'll put it in and then I'll take it out of your purse for the fight.' So I said, 'No, don't worry, that I was going to knock him out and not have to worry about the judges. But Yamil insisted. He said that for safety we needed to do that. And finally he convinced me. I remember you had to go to a room, knock 3 times on the door, and when it opened, throw in a briefcase with $50,000 inside. So I sent my Panamanian trainer, Plamito Espinosa. He did all that, knocked 3 ties, pum pum pum, and then threw the briefcase, supposedly, with $50,000 inside. Plamito then went down and stayed a while in the lobby, and then it turned out that half an hour later, he saw Yamil walk out the lobby with the briefcase. Once Gomez was apprised of Cheday's scheme, it cemented one thing. He could never truly trust Yamil Cheday. Even though Gomez viewed him as a father figure, this move changed everything. After that, Wilfredo was very leery of Yamil. Of course, Yamil was still involved, but shortly after that, he never wanted to renew that contract. Yamil faded from the picture. He constantly wanted to get back into his good graces. Wilfredo never ever spoke to Yamil about what had happened and never let him know that Plamito told him the truth. Now, as brilliant as a business tactician that Cheday was, he still made decisions that were as ill-conceived as they were corrupt. First, he tried to sell Gomez his contract for a nominal fee, and then he attempted to steal from him. It was difficult for Gomez to look at him the same way after what had happened in Japan, but it clearly did not affect anything that happened in the ring, which is where Gomez turned his focus. As the bell rang, Kobayashi, who was 24-3 with 21 KOs, showed no fear as he moved towards the champion to land a hook to the body, early followed by a spirited left hook, which he threw in a leaping motion. Fueling the fire in an intense first round, Kobayashi jolted Gomez's head back with a vicious straight right. Gomez fought with more urgency a round later as he displayed his superior boxing ability. Any boxer who had to face a well-conditioned Gomez working off the jab was in trouble. Along with the effective jab, Gomez also landed his best punch, a check left hook that few, if any, opponents could avoid completely. In an adverse but not untenable situation, Kobayashi managed to close out the round by nailing Gomez, walking in with a straight right. Intensifying his pace and punch output, Gomez reverted back to the uppercuts at the start of the third round. Yep, it was a huge left hook that left Kobayashi sprawled out face first in the corner of the ring. The punch landed with such velocity and power that Kobayashi had lost complete control of his body as soon as the punch landed. The punch highlighted Gomez's one-punch power, but also helped him overcome his slow start. Kobayashi rose at the count of 8 by referee Harry Gibbs, but was in store for more punishment as he fought to stay balanced. Gomez would close out the fight with 2 more knockdowns as Kobayashi never truly recovered from the unforgettable left hook. Harry Gibbs caught Kobayashi at the count of 5 after the third knockdown and waved off the fight. Years later, people would reference that punch as one of the all-time most devastating knockouts. Gomez looked ahead to his next defence. Prior to that knockout, referee Gibbs and Judge Kazuma Kawata actually had Kobayashi in the lead, while Judge Roberto Ramirez Sr. had Gomez winning by a point. "I studied him, and I noticed that he couldn't resist the body shots," said Gomez. "So I decided that I was going to be my plan of attack. It was much easier than expected. It was a left and then a right. It was the hardest punch I ever landed," he said. Not everyone was gushing over Gomez's victory. Leading into the final round, journalist Joe Koziume noted that Gomez appeared more like a naive youngster than a dynamic puncher. Nevertheless, Cheday was envisioning an explosive showdown. "If Wilfredo makes his next defence against Paul Ferrari, we'd like to challenge bantamweight champion Carlos Zarate, because my boy can make 118 pounds. When it came to exerting his dominance on the super bantamweight division, Gomez had already made 2 defences of his crown. Finally, after making quick work of Kobayashi, Gomez was slotted to fight on his first nationally televised bout. On April the 8th, 1978, Gomez would face Juan Antonio Lopez, 26, in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, in his third title defence. Originally, the bout was scheduled for the Roberto Clemente Coliseum, but had to be moved to the Juan Ramon Lebrel Stadium due to a scheduling conflict. Televised on ABC, the Gomez defence against Lopez would be the headliner on a Don King show that also featured Puerto Rican boxers Ossie Oseo, the petulant Edwin Verut, Carlos de Leon, and Carlos Santos. Don King was attempting to corner the Latin market, and Gomez was the best option at that moment because he had such an incredible upside. He was good-looking, charismatic, and Puerto Rican. Thus Don King could market him anywhere in Latin America and then begin to get him recognised in New York and Miami. Don King, Sade, and Jose Sulaiman provided protection and lucrative paydays for Gomez for the foreseeable future. Yamil was a tremendously charming guy, recalled the current WBC president, Mauricio Sulaiman. He said, he had a great charisma about him. He could sell water in a storm. He also had tremendous ability to negotiate. He had the ability to get Wilfredo to Don King, to Caesar's Palace, and then to fight on HBO later on. He knew it was very important to have a big-time promoter behind a big champion. He had the ability to bring Wilfredo into the US market. Now Lopez came into the fight with a record of 41 victories and 7 losses, with 27 coming by way of knockout, while Gomez, who earned $100,000 for this title defence, tried to extend his knockout streak to 19 in a row. Lopez was generously ranked number 3 in the super bantamweight division, but was not blessed with an abundance of skills. Likewise, Lopez was not one to avoid confrontation and quickly realised that he hadn't faced anyone who possessed the type of talent that Gomez exhibited. Puerto Rican fans knew that Gomez liked to show off his boxing skills, and it was rare when he didn't attack immediately in the first round. Nevertheless, a patient Gomez worked behind the jab and danced the majority of the first round. Gomez constantly analysed most of his opponents, but reacted immediately when he found a weakness. After hitting Lopez with a jab that had the power of a right cross, the champion stayed away until the final 40 seconds of the round. Most fighters moved to the left or the right to slip punches. Lopez instinctively ducked his head down and opened himself up for Gomez's firing range of right hands. He would pay mightily for that tactic. It was a perfectly thrown Gomez left hook towards the end of the second round that began attrition that became a common theme in the majority of Gomez's fights. Whether Gomez didn't feel comfortable or wanted to get the rounds in, he didn't press Lopez in his typical fashion. Only during the last 15 seconds of round 3 did Gomez assert himself with intense pressure and combinations. Unable to effectively use his height to his advantage, Lopez was slowly being tormented. At one point, Gomez stepped to his left and was telegraphing his hooks, but Lopez still couldn't avoid them. In the round, a cut opened up above Lopez's right eye. Throughout the fight, Lopez complained about Gomez's dirty tactics. Lopez took a lot of punishment, Gomez said. It was a left hook that opened the cut over Lopez's eye that required stitches. Gomez used the last minute of the 5th round to showcase all of his brilliance. After landing another perfect left hook, he toyed with Lopez. First, he easily landed consecutive right hands that Lopez was unable to counter. Then Gomez threw the right hand, slipped, stepped back, landed another right hand and continued the pattern until the round ended. It was just another reminder that there wasn't another boxer-puncher in the world who had such broad skill sets like Gomez. Some fighters punch harder and some were better boxers, but none combined the rare boxing and punching skills. In the 6th, Gomez exhibited his own version of rope-a-dope as he made Lopez miss. Then he switched places and landed a couple of long, rangy left hooks that belied his usual short crunching hooks that barely travelled 3 inches. Still, they were effective. There was a feeling that Gomez could have ended the fight whenever he pleased, as Lopez's only recourse was to cover up. Referee Zach Clayton finally ended the bout in the 7th. It started with a vicious right hand that Lopez courageously walked through. Then Gomez followed up with his last great hook of the night. But there was more, as Lopez refused to give up. Gomez nudged him back into the middle of the ring and landed, but not cleanly. Ultimately, Lopez ended up being pushed through the ropes, and then before taking any more punishment, he was bare-hooked by Zach Clayton after 2 minutes 41 seconds of the round. No one refuted the stoppage, but fans in the La Briel Stadium applauded Lopez for his bravery. Once again, it was Wilfredo in his prime, a sight to behold. In the dressing room after the fight, Gomez said it was the left hook that got him. Gomez earned $100,000 for the victory, while Lopez settled for $15,000. It was not the last time Gomez would hear from Lopez, as the persistent Mexican challenger would still be in the hunt for the 122-pound title by the time Gomez signed to fight his countryman, Salvador Sanchez, nearly 4 years later. After the fight, Lopez's manager, Ramon Felix Rodriguez, told a reporter, "They said Gomez hit hard and that he overwhelmed his opponents. They also said he was brave, but they never told me how elegantly he could box and that he possessed excellent reflexes." In addition to his manager's analysis, Lopez was also extremely impressed with Gomez when he said, "Zarate better beware because this guy can not only hit, but he can box." He also added, "The blood streaming from my eye didn't let me see." Now, if there was ever a debacle of a title defence, then Chade brought Gomez to Karat in Thailand to face Sakdad Petchendi, a fighter so far removed from being worthy of a title defence that his only real experience came as a champion kickboxer. The Ring magazine would later highlight this fight as one of the biggest title match frauds of all time. Now, coming into the bout, Petchendi had 2 victories and 1 knockout to his credit. Somehow, he managed to beat Juan Antonio Lopez, the victim of Gomez's previous title defence. Every fighter deserves an easy defence, but Petchendi offered no resistance whatsoever. Despite the obvious imbalance of this title matchup, one thing was clear: the fans in Thailand came out in the droves. According to a Puerto Rican reporter, so much marketing and publicity had been put into the bout that 10,000 people showed up at one of Gomez's sparring sessions. He also added, Petchendi was strong, young and full of hope, but he had no boxing experience. The bout on June 2nd, 1978 was, however, rife with controversy as 2 sets of bleachers which held 4,000 people collapsed in the arena before the bout took place. 10 people died in the tragedy and 300 people were injured. As the bleachers fell to the ground, circuits were blown and the arena was blacked out for more than 20 minutes. Still, the promoters didn't cancel the bout, and when all of the injured were removed from the arena, the fight continued. After the hour-long delay, Gomez didn't waste time. He stopped Petchendi with a series of hooks at 2 minutes and 32 seconds of the 3rd round in the Provincial Stadium. This just represented nothing more than a sordid afterthought in the otherwise brilliant career of Gomez. After the bout with Petchendi, Gomez had 2 months to prepare for a much tougher opponent. He said, "I remember it was the bleachers. They expanded the arena. The wood bleachers collapsed before the fight. I remember hearing the people screaming and yelling. I knocked him unconscious in the 2nd round. Still, the questions lingered as to why Chade would sanction that type of a fight, since it did nothing to benefit his fighter. Gomez deserved an occasional easy defence, but fighting a martial artist didn't equate." Gomez said, "He was a karate champion, so they gave me money to promote me as a champion. Money was talking. I was fighting a karate champ. Still, I love seeing Thailand though." Now that brings an end to the first part of the Wilfredo Gomez career profile, and it has been a really interesting and educating first episode for his career profile. We've learnt so much about him, haven't we? We've learnt about his early beginnings, how everything got him into the sport, various accounts from family members, which was really good to be able to hear from, and then of course how he got into the sport of boxing and how great of an amateur career he had. He had an absolutely fantastic amateur career, probably doesn't get spoken about as often as it should. One of the great amateurs in boxing history. Then he moves into the professional side of the sport, and within 11 fights, he's become essentially a superstar. When he becomes a WBC champion, that's when things really starting to progress. And now we're at a point where he's defended that title, contractually obliged to defend that title 3 times. His manager, Chade, what are your thoughts on him? Very much sounds like another version of maybe Don King, who, of course, we will come into in part 2. It feels a little bit like you can already see where this story's going. You know, you've got one dodgy manager doing dodgy deals. You've got someone else coming into the mix who we've covered before on our Darker Side of Boxing, Don King. And of course, part 2 is going to bring him into the foray a little bit more, as well as parts 3 and 4 with Gomez's career. But I hope you've enjoyed this first part. I hope it's been a really good introduction to be able to understand what Wilfredo Gomez is all about, who he is as an individual, and the quotes that are included in this episode, of course, come from the autobiography of Wilfredo Gomez. So a big credit to that autobiography is given for this episode, because it's been great to really hear about what he thought was going on at the time and his perception of these things going on at the time. Now, as always, if you've enjoyed the episode, please continue to comment on Spotify. Those that listen on Spotify, thank you so much. We've got Jimmy P. Bacon. I think it's Hayes Sauce. I can't pronounce the username on there, but I've also appreciated the comments that have come from yourself as well about the length of the episode, and I hope that the way that I've split this Gomez career profile up is much more attainable for people, trying to keep it as less of a listen as possible, but still giving you all the details about these fighters and their lives and some of these great stories. So thank you for the feedback on that. It's been really appreciated. Thank you to those that have been listening on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for listening in that format. I know it can be quite a difficult listen, but I like to stick it up there for those that might want to consume it that way. So please, if you are listening on YouTube, drop a comment in the box below. Any thoughts and feelings about the episode, anything you're looking forward to, anything you want to see us do in the future, it's a good place to do it. For those that haven't rated or reviewed us on Apple or any of the podcasting apps out there that does have a ratings and review system, I implore you to continue to do so. Please leave a rating and review for the podcast. I know those, again, on Spotify, I've been doing it and it's fantastic to see. We've got a really, really great rating on there, and it's great to see you guys are putting the effort in to do that. So please continue to do it, and please continue to leave comments about the episode. Any thoughts and feelings, they're all welcomed. Any recommendations for career profiles, always welcomed. So please continue to do it. If you've not followed us on social media, you can follow us on X at career_profiles, or you can follow us on any other available social media channel at the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Well, that is it for the first part of Wilfredo Gomez's life and career profile. I hope you've enjoyed it. We will see you shortly for part 2. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.